So today's session is about how to get involved in research and what to do if you can't find a position this year, because there are things that you can do. So before we jump in too much, I'm going to have all of the speakers introduce themselves. So I'll go first since I'm already talking. My name is Kathy. I'm a fifth year PhD student in the cognition and cognitive neuroscience area. My PhD is pure research. And the reason I specify that is because Hannah and Jessica are clinical science students. And my research specifically focuses on how working memory, or your memory for things in the immediate future, influences episodic memory, which is your memory for things that happened hours and minutes or days earlier. So Hannah, do you want to go next?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't even realize I was unmuted already. So sorry if I made any noises while you were doing your introduction, Kathy. But yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm in the clinical science program, which is sort of like our clinical psychology program here. And I study sort of the neural and behavioral mechanisms that underlie childhood and youth anxiety disorders and also obsessive compulsive disorder. So I study how the brain might change with those treatments, or how the brain might predict who's going to respond to those treatments. And by treatments, I mean like psychotherapeutic interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, I'll pass it to Jess.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I am a third-year PhD student, also in the clinical psychology program here. I also study the brain, but in a little bit of a different way. I study youth who have been exposed to early life adversity, so things like economic disadvantage or other forms of maltreatment or stress. And I study the environmental factors and also the brain-related correlates of positive outcomes in those kids, so things like resilience.
Okay, awesome. And you all are very lucky because Jess and Hannah are awesome, and they have kindly agreed to answer questions about clinical psych in particular, which I think is really valuable because I know a lot of people want to go into clinical psych. Okay.
Kathy is also awesome, for the record.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so for today's agenda, first we're going to go over presentation norms, which we'll do really quickly because I think we are all used to Zoom school at this point, and I kind of mentioned it in the very beginning. And then I want to plug the STAR Scholars program, which is the program that is sponsoring today's workshop. And then I want to describe, and then we are going to describe traditional research involvement and also what to do on your own if no opportunities are available for you immediately. Okay, so some presentation norms. Like I said earlier, please use mute except when you want to speak. The chat is open for questions and comments during the presentation. You can use the raise hands feature to raise your hand, or if you want to say something, and then the speaker will call on you. And if possible and you're comfortable doing so, we'd love if you have your camera on so that we can see your lovely faces. But of course, no pressure. If you don't want to turn your camera on, you don't have to. So a quick plug for the STAR Scholars program. STAR and STAR Scholars stands for Scholarship, Transferable Skills, Academics, and Research. And the point of this program is to increase students who come from minoritized or underrepresented backgrounds to be engaged with psychological research. And so how we do that is we prepare students to be researchers through several workshops. We provide structured mentoring. And like I said, the goal of this program is to increase the number of students that are conducting advanced research, either in an independent study or with an honors thesis. We also want to create a community that is inclusive and can support students both academically and professionally and in a research sense. Some of the benefits of joining the STAR Scholars program is you are mentored by a current graduate student. And it's not just, you don't get mentoring just for the duration of the program. I actually am in frequent contact with a lot of my former mentors. So specifically I had, or one of my former mentees, specifically I had a mentee last year who I'm still working with to help her get into grad school. Other benefits are informational panels. So some of the panels we have is what it's actually like being a PhD student in psychology. We also get panels on what it's like for research assistants to actually conduct research here at the University of Michigan. And there's also workshops for building skills. We have a workshop for revising your resume or CV, which is the academic version of a resume. We have workshops on beginner statistical analyses and how to use R or JASP. There's also scientific talks and discussions included in the STAR Scholars program. Half of the workshops, if they're not, one-on-one mentoring with a graduate student or panels or skill workshops, we have professors at U of M come in and describe their research and also describe their transition from being an undergraduate, just like yourself, to being a tenured track or tenured professor at the University of Michigan. And there's also the opportunity for networking. Most, if not all, of the STARS mentors are open to talking to any STARS mentee, even if it's not our own mentee. And so not only do you get to meet the STARS mentors that come from diverse areas in life and also diverse areas in psychology, we have a workshop that is specifically for networking with a bunch of different psych grads. And so who knows, that networking could get you into a lab, inspire you for a really cool research direction. Yeah, you never know. But ultimately, our goal is to provide research skills so that you are competitive for doing whatever you want to do next. Whether that's getting a research position in a lab here at University of Michigan, if you want to apply to graduate school, or even if you want to go into industry, which is basically like any private sector job market. So working at a big tech company like Google or Meta. Okay, so that's the benefits of the STAR Scholars Program. Let's talk about how you are eligible for the program and the admissions criteria. So we like to recruit STAR scholars who come from groups that are historically underrepresented in research. So this includes students who are the first in their family to attend a four-year university. This includes international and students without formal documentation status in the United States. This includes students who come from minoritized racial and ethnic backgrounds that are not traditionally represented in research. And this also includes sexual orientation and gender minority students who may not see themselves represented in research. And it also includes people who have experienced financial hardship. If you feel like you don't personally identify in any of these categories, but you do have a commitment to diversity, that also counts towards your eligibility criteria. For admissions criteria, we like to look at your academic performance and whether or not the classes you've taken show an interest in psychology. You don't have to be a psych major at all, but if you do indicate like, oh, they took one or two psych classes, like, and you're interested to learn more about psychology and psychology research, that's something that we take into consideration. We look at the current classes that you're enrolled in. And one key thing is whether or not you're interested in research in particular. Whether or not you're interested in pursuing psych or biopsych research, whether or not you're interested in going to graduate school. And another key thing is whether or not you want a mentor. A key aspect of the STAR Scholar program is that you're learning directly from PhD students. And so if you do indicate that you want specific mentorship from PhD students, then that's what we like to see. And then another aspect is years in college. Typically, we like to accept people who are earlier in their undergraduate career, whether they be first year, second years, or third years. But just because you're a senior and you might be starting a little bit later in your graduate career, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to be rejected from STAR Scholars. It just means that you might have to show more desirable admissions criteria in the other categories. So if this all sounds interesting to you, please apply. If you have any remaining questions, you can email psychstarscholar@umich.edu or put your questions in the chat, and one of the three of us are happy to answer them. The application deadline is coming up. Applications are due on November 3rd. And you can either take a screenshot of the screen that you see here or scan the QR code with your phone. I would like to put in a caveat that this program is limited to University of Michigan undergrads. And so if you are joining this session from a different university, unfortunately, this program is not for you, but maybe your undergraduate institution has a similar program. So I would recommend checking that out. Oh, let me also put the link in the chat. All right, so now we're going to transition to the actual meat of this workshop, which is how to get involved in research. So we're going to talk about traditional research involvement, including why you would want to get involved, how you even figure out what your research interests are, the types of ways you can be involved, and then what you're supposed to do once you decide, oh, I do want to get involved in research. So here are some of the benefits of getting involved in research. What you're doing is creating knowledge for the world that nobody knows or has done before, which is incredibly gratifying, in my opinion. You're also building transferable skills. You're working in a team. You are being mentored or mentoring other people. You also need research experience to be competitive for PhD programs, and having research experience on your resume also makes you look better for master's degrees as well. Another benefit of research involvement is establishing and growing your network. You meet other undergraduates working in labs and also the grad students there, and you never know when someone you meet will help you later on in life. Research can also help you build confidence. You learn a bunch of skills and you like push yourself to grow in different ways that you might not have even expected by doing a research project or getting involved in research. Getting involved in research also really helps you refine your own interests and goals. For example, like maybe you think research is really cool, but then you do it and then you're like, I don't know if this is like for me as a career. Well, then you know that. And then that'll help you narrow down what you actually do want to do after you graduate from undergrad. And there's a bunch more things, much more benefits of research involvement than what's listed on the slide. Okay, so the next topic I want to talk about is how to identify your research interest. And these are some questions you should consider as you think about what type of research you might want to be involved in. One huge thing which is what how I figured out what type of research I wanted to do is to, when you're sitting in your class, think about what topics have really stood out to you, or which instructors really inspired you in their classes. And what specific classes in general also inspired you. I'm sure you all have classes that you really liked and classes that you really didn't like. So think about like what you did like about those classes. Are there any questions that you found yourself wondering in your favorite class that you still wonder about to this day? So for example, when I was an undergrad, my first research experience was working in an infant cognition lab. And first of all, I was obsessed with the professor who taught that class. She was awesome. And so I was like, oh, I would love to work with her in her lab, and worked with her a little bit more. And there were just some off things that she would say of like, she'd be like, babies know math. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? What do you mean babies know math? And then I was like, I just kept wondering that. And then, I ended up reaching out, I joined her lab, and not only do babies know math, they actually know a lot more things. And so if you find yourself thinking these questions and being like, wait, what do you mean? During a class, maybe you should do research on it. Other ways to identify your research interest are whether there are any topics outside of your major that you think are interesting. So for example, if you're a cog-sci major, but you take a biopsych class and you're like, oh, it's really interesting how this cog-sci concept is related to this biopsych concept. Like maybe you could do a research project that connects the two. Another thing you want to think about is, what is your dream career? This is a very pragmatic reason to identify your research interests. For example, if you know you want to be a cardiologist, maybe you should do research in cardiology as an undergrad, right? If you know you want to work with dementia patients after undergrad, maybe you should do some research that helps dementia patients and actually work with them. Otherwise, you could think about the different type of research based on your hobbies. And then also what skills you're interested in developing, whether you want to work as part of a team or individually. And I'll come back to team versus individual later. Whether location matters and what types of organisms you want to study. In psychology in particular, there's so many ways that you can tackle psychological concepts. You can study them in humans, you can study them in animals, and then within humans, you can study them with little kids, you could study them with older adults, you could study them with patient populations. There's so many things. Yeah. Okay. And then from here, I'm going to transition over to Jess, and then I will address Veronica's question in the chat.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much, Kathy, for kicking us off and providing all that helpful information. I'm going to continue on a little bit with just kind of what research can look like and what the different opportunities are to keep in mind when you're considering pursuing this experience. So if you don't mind clicking forward, maybe just once. Perfect. Okay, so there are, as you know, Kathy was starting to explain, there are a lot of different types of research that happen. And so this is, a little bit repeated from what she was saying, but it's just really important to consider what those different options are when you're exploring different research positions. So the in-person versus virtual thing is interesting, I think, especially after, given the pandemic and all of the kind of shift to virtual that happened, there are a lot of people that will administer virtual questionnaires or do virtual visits with participants. And so there are going to be labs with different perspectives or kind of different approaches to collecting data. And that's something to consider. And that also can be really impacted by the types of subjects that you work with. So obviously, animal research is really hard to do virtually because you need to be there physically in many instances. But with humans, you can do more of that, like virtual communication, survey, filling out, and stuff like that. Okay, if you don't mind clicking one more time. Thank you. And so then also in terms of types of research, there are different types of projects that can be completed. And so a meta-analysis is essentially a type of research project that pools a bunch of independent studies on a topic and looks to understand overall trends that might be consistent across these different studies. So that's one type of research project that you may be involved in a research lab. And then secondary data has to do more with the type of data that you're working with. So basically, a secondary data analysis would mean that someone else already collected the data, or the data is already there, and you are using the data that's been collected to ask a novel question. So an example of this might be, there's a study called the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, like the ABCD sample. And so this is thousands of kids across the entire United States that are completing this longitudinal study over time. And so you could utilize that sample to answer a question of interest yourself. That's something a lab might do, versus being the person who met up with the participant and asked them the questions yourself. And then there are also other ways there are multiple ways to be involved in research. So some positions are going to be paid. For example, a lot of post-baccalaureate positions after people graduate, like lab managers or research coordinators, those are full-time jobs that are paid. It's also possible to get credit for being in a research lab. So instead of taking a class, you're getting credits for working in the lab. And then lastly, volunteering is another option in which you are kind of trading in your time for gaining those skills and that experience, like we said, which is really critical for your future applications and interests. And then, of course, there can also be work study arrangements where you're involved in research with a lab as part of your work study. So next slide, please. Great. So in terms of when to get involved, honestly, the answer is kind of anytime. It's always great to be pursuing these opportunities. And so there are a lot of different times when this might fit for your training trajectory, for what opportunities are available, right? And so it might be that your research interests align with doing research at a certain time. For example, if you want to study kids in school, then you have to be collecting data probably, during the semester. And then maybe your lab is analyzing that data over the summer. Or, there are other things that might be better measured in the summer. Maybe there's like a field campaign or something, and people are doing an extended study in the summer, and then you're analyzing at a different time. So it can vary by lab and by project. But for the most part, most labs are doing research during the semester because grad students are here, postdocs, and everyone else involved in the lab. And so it's a good idea to be trying to contact professors and looking into these positions during the academic year. Labs are going to vary in terms of how much time they're asking of you. Some professors are going to want students to work during the semesters. I know in my lab, we often have undergraduates who do volunteer over the summer as well. So that can vary by lab that you would want to talk to the principal investigator about. All right. Great. So, and I guess one other thing I wanted to mention with that is that even if you don't have time to complete, formal, thanks, Kathy, if you don't have time to complete formal research during the semesters, there's also a lot of summer opportunities that I'll talk about in a little bit as well. All right. So in terms of other things to keep in mind, as I've been alluding to, there's a lot of variability in terms of the experiences and responsibilities that you might have across different labs, which is why it's really helpful to do some research into what their main projects are and kind of how the lab functions if you're in an interview process or gathering information from, say, grad students or something like that. One thing to be considered is whether lab meeting attendance is expected. So for some labs, they're going to want more kind of structured time, and students might be coming in during certain hours and having, that involvement face-to-face. And then, for example, my research in undergrad, I did a lot of it on my own time and kind of just filled in my class schedule where that fit. So that's another conversation to have as you're considering joining a lab. And then some other great things to think about are that, these research experiences could result in some really great learning experiences farther down the line too. So it may be the case that you join a lab in your first, second, or third year, and then in your senior year, you are actually doing a senior or an honors thesis. And those projects might allow you to do a poster presentation or even publish a paper. And so I think that's important to keep in mind for the research kind of topic that you select, because it can be a really good learning experience to realize that this isn't my area of interest, but also it's good to try and pick something that excites you from the beginning, because you might actually have these pretty in-depth experiences with conducting that research later on. All right, next one. Thanks. So in terms of actionable items, what we can do now that we know I want to apply for a research position. So there are a lot of different ways that you can go about this. Luckily, there are a lot of resources. There are also going to be a lot to sift through. So, you can go step by step through these. One good area, just as a place to start, is to look at department websites, see what PIs there are, what kind of research is being done. And something to consider is that, there could be research labs that interest you that are outside of the psychology department. So even if you're a psychology major, maybe there are, cognitive science labs or neuroscience or biology labs that are doing things that also interest you. And so that could be something to consider as well. And faculty profiles and lab websites are a really good place to get a sense of what kind of projects are going on, although they're not always completely up to date. So another way that you can do it is to look up the professor on Google Scholar, because that'll have their recent publications and you can see some recent things that have come out of the lab that might be interesting. And then another great resource is talking to your professors, your graduate student instructors, or just other students that are maybe involved in research. So, as Kathy was saying, if you have a class that you're really excited about, maybe that professor is taking undergrads. I have grad student friends who have started working with undergrads that they were teaching. And so it's definitely a great networking opportunity when you're in classes, if you're really excited about something, to ask about research availability there. And then, as we discussed, the STAR workshops have a lot of resources on these applications. And so, being here, attending this is a great step as well in gaining that information. And then just a couple of other big picture things. So, research, it can be slow, it takes time. There are a lot of steps from the first idea of a project to a finished product. And so it's okay that it can take some time to actually get involved and figure out what excites you in terms of your interests. And then for the big picture also, figuring out your research interests and what you want to do after undergrad is a really helpful thing to have in mind when you're considering these different labs. So taking your time to explore your options, consider what's available, is probably worth that extra time as you're going through this process. All right, so now I'm just going to go through a little example of what my research trajectory looked like. Obviously, this isn't what everyone's looked like, but as someone who decided to pursue a clinical psychology PhD, this is just kind of an example of a path to that. So I studied at a school pretty different from Michigan. It was a very small liberal arts college. And so basically I started out, and I majored in neuroscience. And so I started out my freshman year just, taking my foundational classes, declaring my major. And that's when I decided that I wanted to get involved in research. So my sophomore year, I joined a research lab. It was a lab that studied using animal models. We studied alcohol use and fear memory, kind of that intersection with some related interests in PTSD, trauma, and alcohol use. And so I was really excited about this research, and I decided to apply for internships over the summer. And I actually did an internship here at the University of Michigan with Dr. Shelley Flagel. If any of you have met her, she's wonderful. She studies animal models as well of, oh, sorry, my camera's been freezing. Can you still hear me? Yeah, okay, great, there it is. So basically she studies animal models of substance use and reward processing and kind of individual differences in those pathways. And so I did that internship and I really enjoyed it, but I realized that I really wanted to work with people and take some of these clinical concepts and actually study them in human participants. So I continued my work in the lab that I was in since sophomore year during my junior year, but I applied to internships that were solely clinical with clinical populations. And so my junior summer, I was at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. And while there, I was in a lab that worked with adults with cocaine use disorder. So still kind of that theme of substance use and reward, but in a different population. And that included neuroimaging and kind of building those skills. And then my senior year, I completed a project where I helped to design a study with another undergraduate, and I presented that at a poster session at my school, and I applied for postdoc jobs. And so I worked for 2 years at the National Institute of Mental Health. And while there, I worked to study like neurocognitive mechanisms of pediatric anxiety, and I applied to graduate school from there. So that's just an example of research throughout undergrad. Great. So we just wanted to provide these resources as some things you can do. As you noticed, I talked about 2 different summer internships, and they were really great opportunities to be in a different lab, to experience, a different lab culture or size or research topic. And so there are a lot of opportunities and programs through the University of Michigan, as well as really all over the country at universities in a lot of locations. Some of these programs will provide a stipend, they'll provide housing, it's a really great learning opportunity, especially if it's funded. And so these are just a list of a lot of different places that you might consider applying to as you're looking for research experiences outside of your semesters. And so in terms of pursuing some of these opportunities, these summer research programs tend to be kind of like the STARS program, where there's a formal application. You might write essays, provide your curriculum vitae, like your CV or your resume, and do recommendation letters. For contacting professors at your home university, if you want to join a research lab, there are sometimes job positions posted for undergraduate research assistants, like on job forums and stuff. But a lot of the time, it's also just kind of cold emailing. So just sending an email to a professor and saying, hi, I'm really interested in your work. Do you have any positions available? And so this is a sample email. Essentially, it just kind of walks through saying, what year you are, what your major is, briefly what excited you about their research, and then being sure to attach your resume or CV and saying, maybe highlighting 1 or 2 things that you've done that you think would be a good fit, or that you're kind of proud of, that you want the professor to know about in terms of your eligibility for being a research assistant. And then if there are, limited openings, you don't have to say due to the pandemic, but I think that there are, normally a certain amount of slots no matter what time it is. And so you can always ask as well if they have any other recommendations for other positions that are available, and just express your interest and kind of curiosity in gaining skills and getting into the research environment. And now, so we've talked about kind of the best case scenario, right? You reach out, they say, yes, I'd love to have you, and you join the lab. Sometimes that doesn't happen right away. That's perfectly okay. And so now we're going to transition to talk about what happens if that's the case. This little meme here, I think is a feeling that many of us have experienced, where you feel like you want experience, but to get experience, you need experience. And that feels very cyclical and hard to break out of. So we're going to talk about how to break out of that a little bit now. So I think the first thing is to kind of broaden your horizons on what you consider to be experience, right? And so if you don't mind clicking forward like 2, we can just think a little bit about other locations. So obviously your home university is a great place to start, but there are also potentially, hospitals or research institutes or other private companies that are doing great work that you could get involved in. And so I think that, pursuing some of those opportunities outside of your school, especially during the summer, I think is a really great way to gain experience to then go back to your home university and try for research positions there. And then I think there are 3 more things on this slide, if you can. Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So then another thing that I want to highlight that I think is particularly true of my experience is that you can gain research experience in one area and then decide that you want to transition to another one. So I started out in animal models of alcohol use and fear memory, transitioned to human models, and then moved populations from adults to kids. And so all of those transitions, I think, were made easier just by being able to describe what skills I had gained in the research environment that applied to the next position, and really just describing your excitement and motivation for this new population or area. But it's very much the case that being in a lab that works with animal models can still be very applicable and well regarded if you're applying to a research lab that maybe works with humans or a different topic.
Okay, awesome. So I think I'm going to take over here. We are going to be doing like a full Q&A at the end, but I just wanted to pause here because Justice gave you all a lot of really, really valuable information. I just wanted to see, and Kathy too, before, if people have any questions about those two sort of parts of the presentation, just any pressing questions at the moment, that I would pause here for like 30 seconds. Okay, I'm experiencing that phenomenon where 5 seconds of silence really feels like a minute. So I'm going to move on, but feel free to be thinking of questions as we go through on any part of the presentation, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about independent skill building and things that you can do. Oh, Kathy, would you mind going back to the slide of the different opportunities? Thanks. I'll start talking about the independent skill building in the meantime, but I was sort of thinking about these skills as something that you could work on, right? As if you're waiting to apply for a position, if you cycle sort of happens and passes and you weren't able to find a position, these are things that you can be working on sort of passively pretty much anytime. And I promise you that they will not be a waste of your time. Any one of these skills that Kathy's going to put up here will be valuable. So I think I would start, if I were in your shoes again, which we all were, Kathy and Jess and I, would be to sort of go look at some of those positions, and you could access the ones via the links that were on the previous slides, and just see, like, they always have like a recommended skills sort of section when you're applying to any job. And they might say certain things that feel you've never heard of before, so it'd be good to look into those. And some of them you might be vaguely familiar with, but you might want to start to feel more confident in that area. So some of the specific common skills that I certainly see on job applications are like programming languages to conduct statistical tests. So that would be like SPSS or R. And also just how to conduct a literature review, how to read journal articles and summarize them in a sort of systematic way. And then, you know, many new things that you'll see on these lists might feel really overwhelming. So try your best not to be overwhelmed. All of these things are new, and they were new to all the people who are doing them currently. I know all of us, I'll speak for all of us and say that I learn sort of a new skill every day. And a lot of those skills I would have said, oh, I never would be able to do that before trying. And you guys are all, you know, wonderful, smart people. So be brave and try to dip your toes into some of these new things. One thing that is really helpful, I've not actually tried this, but I have friends who have had good success with this, is finding an accountability partner, or multiple people to sort of do a virtual or in-person work session. But you could literally set up a Zoom so that like people are looking at you and then you stay focused on your task on your computer. And along that same line, I think it's helpful to just set aside some time during the week to actually work towards building these skills, because if the time isn't set aside, it's going to be really hard to create that time during your busy weeks. And we'll give you some ideas on the next few slides of like specific things that you could be learning during that time. Set SMART goals. So along those same lines, maybe just saying like 30 minutes of time, even once a week, or 30 minutes a day if you have that much time. But try to set things that are very specific that you can achieve in that period of time, right? So the SMART goals that are measurable. And this is like a huge thing that grad students always talk about. But like, instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to work on my dissertation today, which would feel really overwhelming and make me want to cry, and you know, just feel like I'm not going to be able to achieve that, and then you don't even want to start, right? Saying like, oh, I'm going to write 1 paragraph of the introduction of my dissertation today, that is a lot more feasible. I will feel good about myself once I achieve that. It's measurable and I'm making specific progress. So I think that is totally applicable, especially when you're starting and looking at like a list of all these different potential skills that you could learn, instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to learn R today. Maybe try to teach yourself to use 1 package in R that day, or to run 1 type of statistical test in R that day. I think that would be a really good place to start, right? And along those same lines, resist the urge to start too many new things at once, because this would lead to burnout and not wanting to even try at all, and always be kind to yourself. So I'll move to the next slide now. Okay, cool. So also you can look at the job positions to find some of those skills, but you can also, if you're reading a journal article for class, or you might already be doing some research on your own and you have articles that are sort of you find interesting, going to the methods sections of those papers, they might list what sorts of statistics they used, or maybe what methods they used to collect the data. Those would be all valuable sources of information about what types of skills would be good to learn. In addition to just sort of like trying to teach yourself some of these things through Googling or reading books, you could take a course on Coursera or MOOC. And I had to look up what MOOC is. Apologize if I'm saying that wrong, but it's like TEDx's version of Coursera. So they have its massive open online course, and they also look like they have a lot of cool classes. Yes, and then this is certainly true. If you can sort of demonstrate some specific output from your learning that you've done, even if it wasn't for like a class or a lab or anything specific, but just something that you could share personally, that would be really helpful and such a wonderful thing to be able to list on your CV or your resume when you're applying to jobs. And so this would be quite ambitious to create like a whole program on your own and then put that on your GitHub page, but some of you guys might be at that level. Alternatively, right, you could definitely put like a certificate from a Coursera course if you have done that, and link to that on your LinkedIn or something. I'm trying to think of other ways to sort of output. You could put a brief writing sample if you've practiced some writing on literature reviews. You could even put like an Excel spreadsheet of papers that you've reviewed. Something like that would be really nice, specific output to have to demonstrate all the learning and your hard work. Okay, I'll put on the next one. Cool. So these are all sorts of programs that I think all of the grad students are familiar with. And some of these you might see. I think Mendeley is, that's what I used in undergrad, but I think it is now out of commission, unfortunately. I now use Otero, so that's sort of what I'm most familiar with, but all of these are really good ways for keeping track of journal articles. So as you sort of, if those of you are interested in going to research, these will become very common household names for you, but they might feel totally foreign now, and that's okay too. But you read a lot of literature and research. You might be reading some journal articles for class, and it becomes a huge amount of information with not a lot of organization naturally. So these programs sort of allow you to store those articles. You can store your notes and your highlights. You can jot down certain keywords that might be relevant. So then if you're working in a lab that studies a specific thing and they say, oh, we want you to write a little paragraph about XYZ, you could go back into your stored articles in Zotero, for instance, and try to summarize literature that you've already read. Otherwise, like if you're just sort of saving PDFs here and there, that information can get lost. And again, that's sort of wasted time that you've invested into learning, that then you don't have access to that information anymore. I've definitely done that too, just out of laziness, but it is really helpful to have these to store. In Google Scholar and PubMed, PsycInfo, all of these can be really good places to find the articles themselves, which then you would store in a Zotero or Mendeley type of thing. Okay. Oh, here are some other specific skills that could be good to use specifically for stats. So yeah, Excel is like that common thing, right? That everyone says like, oh yeah, I'm good at Excel. And I think most people are, and you could probably navigate through a lot of these things if you needed to on the fly, but it is really helpful. I've certainly been in the position in many research labs where I was asked to do something that appeared to be an easy task in Excel, but actually took me quite a while. That would have been nice if I had sort of felt comfortable with that already going into it. So yeah, you can learn specific functions within Excel, like how to do pivot tables or write specific formulas. And then other programs that a lot of people use to do data cleaning, statistics, and plotting of the data are JASP, R, and SPSS, which we already talked about. So R is free. I'm actually not sure about JASP, but it sounds like JASP is also open source, which is great, which means that it's accessible to everyone. SPSS, you do have to purchase a license, but you know, there might be certain ways to access that. I know certain courses might give you access to that here. And some schools might have access to that as well. So those are all good programs to start to learn. I think in terms of like, again, setting out to learn these programs on their own can be sort of a daunting task. So I would really focus on setting specific goals here if you're going to do that. Like maybe watching one YouTube video about how to run a certain analysis in R a day or something like that could be really cool, and take notes on that. Another thing that too is sort of fortunate, I think, to where you guys are in the modern world is that certainly a lot of even advanced level graduate students and coders, people who do this for a living, Google a lot of things as they're going, because they're learning. There's constantly new packages, right, that are being developed, different ways to run the same sorts of analyses. So I think historically I'm used to like frantically Googling those things if I want to know, but I've been using ChatGPT a lot to help me write code recently. And so if you, you know, I'm not sure I totally vouch for ChatGPT to be used in all of your schoolwork, but certainly if you're trying to learn a new program or something like this, then, you know, here at the bottom it says how to do thing X in X program. Then you can definitely search that in ChatGPT, and it can be really, really helpful. And I'm sure it would actually link a lot of resources too for learning those programs. So I just wanted to plug that a little bit as well. Okay. So some other really good skills that can be learned in the downtime that aren't sort of statistic specific are ways to collect the data itself, which oftentimes are these like survey administration and collection tools. So I do a lot of work out of Michigan Medicine, and they do a lot of survey and data collection through REDCap and Qualtrics. So some of you guys might already be familiar with that, but those are just like online surveys. So you might have actually taken a survey that was like sent to you via Qualtrics or REDCap. Prolific, I know that I was just talking to Kathy that she is using this right now in her dissertation, but Prolific, MTurk, and Pavlovia are all used to sort of reach the masses or specific, Kathy might know this better than I, but or specific sort of populations in the world, and can collect a lot of data all at once. So whereas you might have like a Qualtrics survey that I administered to 100 undergraduates here locally, you could put something on MTurk, which is actually run through Amazon, and get like many, many, many responses in a short amount of time. So if you're trying to get like a lot of subjects, that could be a good thing to learn. Yeah, all of these things are just helpful to have some general understanding of what they are, maybe how to create a survey, how to distribute or send out a survey, and the relative like pros and cons of each of these. So if you are in a lab and they're sort of wanting to use one of these, you might have a good starting knowledge already. Biopsych and CCN, I think, really use MATLAB, Python. Those are, again, sort of tools for statistical analysis, but also ways to visualize data. And then PsychoPy, PsycToolbox, and ePrime are all ways that if you've taken ever, this might be sort of outdated slightly too, but if you've ever taken an experiment on a computer, sort of as you, the participant, then it was probably done with like ePrime or PsychoPy. So that's the program that wrote sort of the language that is allowing you to see the different stimuli that you're responding to and stuff like that. So that's, again, another great skill to have in your back pocket, because certainly labs are always needing help with how to design those experiments in the first place. Okay, cool. And just to like show you, I think this is a really neat resource. In 2020, I guess there was actually data collected on the relative programs that different people at the University of Michigan psychology department were using. So what they were using for data management analysis, and then what they were using for experiment survey collection, data collection. So I think if Kathy tabs forward, you guys should be able to see the breakdown. So these are all the different areas that were asked for their input, and those are the roles of the people. So it looks like most of them were faculty and then graduate students. And then those are all the different areas. So it looks like CCN was really well represented. Maybe they were the ones who administered the survey. But I think if we go forward, we should be able to see what the responses were. So cool. as you can see, a lot of people still use Excel, R, SPSS, so that could be a good indicator of what are some of the most relevant things to learn. I will say probably in the last few years, the SPSS folks have probably shifted a little bit more into the art camp, but it looks like clinical, they're my area. Justice area is really well represented in the SPSS people, so maybe that's not very true. But yeah, I think all of those would be good bets, right, to learn Excel, R, or SPSS. GPower is a tool that we use to figure out like how many subjects that we need to run for a given analysis so that our study will be well powered enough to sort of like analyze the question or ask the research question that we were intending to. And then MATLAB and Python, I feel like those didn't get enough credit, but maybe those are less important to learn based on this particular survey. And so that's for data management. And then this is for experiment, survey creation, and data collection. So you can see the breakdown there. Yeah, Qualtrics is really, seems to be a lot of people have been using Qualtrics, so that could be a really good place to start. I also personally find Qualtrics to be relatively straightforward. I'm doing a survey right now, or a study right now that I use Qualtrics to collect the data, and it's just like really easy to navigate through that. And I had some research assistants help me with that as well, and they were able to learn that on the fly, but it did take a lot of time for all of us to put our heads together, and it would have been like the best thing ever if that research assistant had already sort of come in and been able to just do that without a ton of guidance. And obviously I would check everything, but just like that could be you. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like that could be your opportunity to walk in and be like, yeah, I can do that totally, no problem. And as always, you know, it's good to ask questions and stay humble and stuff, but make sure you're doing things the right way. But I think that these would all be good things to learn. And okay, cool. So how to move forward with intention, continue to build your skills. These are all good things, I guess, that are summarizing the specific skills that we just talked about, but just to open your minds a little bit further. Besides like coding in R, Python, you could learn how to create a website. That could be helpful if you're a lab manager and you're managing a lab's website, but it could also be helpful just for your own website if you want to make yourself more available or your work more available on the internet. And then definitely the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, having some sort of experience with what that is. The process of navigating through that is going to be relevant to pretty much any study that you'll be a part of. And so that's another invaluable skill. Our imaging analyses are very cool. There's a lot of online training courses. Actually, we have the training courses that I grew up on as an undergrad that I would like watch late into the evening when I was trying to figure out how to do things. That professor is actually at the University of Michigan, Andy Yan. So I would definitely, he still has his YouTube channel. Would definitely recommend like going through some of those if you wanted to learn more there. I was like shocked when I learned that he was actually here after many years of watching those, like 10 years ago now. And then, right, language skills, that's another wonderful thing, sort of diversifying. I guess I was thinking, yeah, here, like speaking languages, but I guess you could also learn programming languages. But I think being able to communicate in multiple languages is a strength always, and especially in the research setting and clinical setting. Relevant coursework, readings, and then demonstrate responsibility and interest by doing volunteer work. I think those would be all great uses of your time if you're sort of waiting to reapply to research positions. Okay, and so final thoughts. Stay positive always and think creatively. So if you're feeling like, oh, I have some extra downtime, I'm a little bummed that maybe I don't have a position this semester, or I didn't get the position I wanted, then try to reframe that as an opportunity to really make yourself like the perfect candidate and the perfect sort of researcher for some of these positions in the future. And yeah, sometimes you just need to start. That's the hardest part. So yeah, it can really be an opportunity to set yourself up well for the future rather than having to scramble like during the semester to learn all of these things after you already have a position. Being prepared already could be a really nice place to be. So I think that's most of what we're covering, and now we'll move into the question or comment section. So yeah, feel free to write questions in the chat. You can ask them out loud. You can raise your hand. We'll call on you. Whatever you'd like to do, but now's a good time to ask. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.
And while we're sort of waiting for questions, this Psych Star Scholar at UMich email has the you can email that email address and it gets pinged to the Star Scholar Committee, sort of. So you'll get a response to that hopefully very quickly if you have any questions about the Star Scholar program or the material covered today. And then, yeah, Kathy was just put up the future seminars that are going to be conducted and hosted by Star Scholars. So there's a special seminar taking place November 1st, which is next week at 2:30, and that could be good practice to help developing a pre-professional website, which is what we were just talking about. And then the next seminar, which is November 9th, so in about a week and a half, we'll cover actually applying to research opportunities and what that looks like.